On November 14, 2025, Kyiv awoke to a new level of terror, a massive, coordinated Russian missile and drone barrage. The city, already scarred by months of conflict, faced an onslaught that was both relentless and unprecedented in its scale and precision. Residents who had grown used to the distant sounds of war now found themselves at the very center of its fury. This was not just another attack, it targeted the heart of civilian life. Apartment blocks, schools, and hospitals, places once considered safe, were now in the crosshairs. The city's daily rhythm was shattered in an instant. Explosions shattered the pre-dawn calm, smoke filled the air and sirens wailed across the city. Families huddled in darkened corridors, clutching loved ones as the ground trembled beneath them. A hospital was hit, turning a place of healing into chaos and tragedy. The very building meant to save lives became a scene of devastation, its walls torn open by the blast. Doctors and nurses became victims, scrambling for survival amid collapsing ceilings and shattered wards. Their courage was tested as they tried to help the wounded, even as they themselves were in danger. At least 6 people died, dozens were wounded, and the Azerbaijani embassy was struck, sending diplomatic shockwaves far beyond Ukraine. The attack left families grieving and the international community reeling. Russia's justification, retaliation for supposed Ukrainian attacks, rang hollow to grieving families. For them, no explanation could justify the loss of loved ones or the destruction of their homes. The attack was a calculated escalation, a signal that Moscow would cross any line, even targeting hospitals. It was a message meant to intimidate, to show that no place was off limits. It was designed to break Ukrainian resolve, to instill fear that nowhere was safe. The silence that followed the blast was heavy with uncertainty, but also with a growing sense of defiance. But as dawn broke over a wounded city, shock hardened into determination. Neighbors emerged to help one another, clearing rubble and offering comfort in the cold morning light. The Kremlin's brutality had misjudged the spirit it would provoke. Instead of surrender, it sparked outrage and unity among Ukrainians. Kyiv's people mourned, but they also steeled themselves for what was to come. In the face of terror, their resolve only deepened. The world watched as Ukraine's resolve only grew stronger. Messages of support poured in, and the international community condemned the attack. Russia's terror had failed to break them. Instead, it forged a city and a nation more united and determined than ever before. Ukraine's response was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the country's military machine was in motion, fueled by a sense of urgency and resolve. The attack on Kyiv had crossed a line, and Ukraine was determined to show that it would not be intimidated. Hours after the attack on Kyiv, Ukrainian forces struck Russia's Black Sea oil port of Novorossiysk. Using Neptune cruise missiles and swarms of drones, they launched a coordinated assault that caught Russian defenses off guard. They targeted the heart of Russia's oil export infrastructure, a vital artery for Moscow's war economy and a symbol of its global influence. The message was clear: attack our civilians, and your economy will pay. Ukraine was no longer just absorbing blows. It was sending a warning that every strike on its people would have consequences far beyond the battlefield. Explosions lit up the Russian coast, crippling the Sheskari's oil terminal. The night sky over Novorossiysk glowed with fire as critical infrastructure burned, sending shockwaves through Russia's energy sector. 2 main berths were destroyed, halting the flow of oil and causing chaos at one of Russia's most important export hubs. The attack forced Russia to suspend all oil exports from the port, leaving tankers stranded and the docks eerily silent. Nearly 2.2 million barrels of oil per day were suddenly offline, a staggering blow to Moscow and the global market. The ripple effects were felt instantly, with oil prices surging and analysts scrambling to assess the damage. Ukraine had found a way to make the war expensive for Russia, striking where it hurt most. This was not just a military operation but a strategic move designed to undermine Russia's ability to fund its aggression. This was a new phase, one defined by asymmetric warfare, intelligence, and the clever use of technology to level the playing field. Precision over brute force became Ukraine's mantra, as it leveraged every advantage to disrupt Russian operations. The Novorossiysk strike was not just revenge, it was a calculated move to shift the strategic balance. Ukraine was signaling to the world that it could hit back, and hit hard. Russia's critical infrastructure was now vulnerable, exposed to further attacks that could cripple its economy and military logistics. For every missile that fell on Ukraine, there would be a price in billions. The cost of war was no longer just measured in territory or casualties, but in economic devastation. The rules of the war had changed. Ukraine was rewriting the playbook, forcing Russia to confront a new and unpredictable threat. Ukraine was no longer just defending, it was fighting back, determined to shape the outcome of the war on its own terms. The Novorossiysk strike sent shockwaves through global markets, reverberating far beyond the Black Sea. Overnight, headlines blared about a new era of risk for energy security. With 2% of the world's oil supply suddenly offline, prices spiked instantly, sending traders scrambling and governments into emergency meetings. For Russia, it was a sudden severe disruption to its main source of war funding. Oil exports, the lifeblood of the Kremlin's war machine, ground to a halt. The attack exposed Russia's vulnerability. Its oil empire was now a target, and the world was watching to see how Moscow would respond. A Sierra Leone-flagged tanker was hit, injuring crew and highlighting the risks to international shipping. The Black Sea, once a vital artery for commerce, had become a perilous zone. The Black Sea was no longer safe for Russian commerce. It had become a war zone, patrolled by navies and shadowed by the threat of further attacks. Russian authorities suspended oil supplies, creating a logistical nightmare and millions in daily losses. Tankers sat idle, and contracts were thrown into chaos. The financial pressure on the Kremlin intensified, already strained by sanctions and war costs. The ruble tumbled, and investors braced for more instability. The fires at Novorossiysk shattered the illusion of safety for ordinary Russians. For many, the war's distant thunder was now a terrifying reality. The war was no longer distant, it was burning at home, visible from kitchen windows and city streets. Ukraine had shown it could strike at the core of Russia's economy, using precision and daring to reshape the conflict's front lines. Fear and uncertainty spread from Kyiv to Moscow. Across both nations, people wondered what would come next. The balance of power was shifting, and the world was watching as a new chapter in the war unfolded. Novorossiysk was just the beginning. On the same day, Ukrainian drones struck deep into Russia, hitting a Saratov oil refinery and a fuel depot in Engels. Days earlier, naval drones targeted the Tuapse port, further disrupting Russian logistics. Ukraine's campaign was systematic to degrade Russia's ability to use Black Sea ports and stretch its defenses thin. On land, a drone strike hit the Lykovskoy railway station, a key military logistics hub. By targeting supply lines, Ukraine aimed to slow Russian reinforcements and create bottlenecks. This was smart warfare, maximum impact with limited resources. Ukraine was no longer just reacting, it was setting the terms of engagement. Russia's entire infrastructure, oil, rail, ports, was now at risk. The cost of war for Moscow was rising fast. Ukraine's strategy was forcing the Kremlin to rethink its aggression. While Ukraine struck deep, brutal ground combat raged in the east. Pokrovsk became the epicenter of Russia's offensive, a relentless meat grinder of shelling and trench warfare. Russia threw 170,000 troops into the battle, seeking a breakthrough at any cost. October alone saw 25,000 Russian casualties, a record toll from human wave attacks. Ukrainian forces, outnumbered but determined, held key positions and launched counterattacks. Every inch of ground was fiercely contested. The fight for Pokrovsk was as critical as the high-tech strikes on Russian oil. On one front, Ukraine innovated. On the other, it endured. The courage of soldiers in the trenches bought time for Ukraine's broader strategy. The fate of the war was being decided both in fiery explosions and muddy trenches. Ukraine's resilience was on full display. The world took notice as the conflict escalated. Ukraine's Western allies reaffirmed support. Italy sent its 12th aid package. Germany pledged $11.5 billion for 2026. These commitments sent a clear message. The West's resolve was only strengthening. Meanwhile, Russia turned to isolated allies, most notably North Korea. Up to 14,000 North Korean soldiers arrived in Russia, mainly for hazardous demining, with thousands already killed. Russia issued nuclear threats, warning NATO to stay out. But these warnings rang increasingly hollow as Western support grew. The war had become a global chessboard, with alliances and risks reshaping the future. Every move now carried consequences far beyond Ukraine. The stakes had never been higher. Beneath its aggression, Russia was showing strain. New U.S. sanctions hit oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil, slowing economic growth to a crawl. Even top bankers admitted to Putin that the economy was faltering. The Kremlin's narrative of resilience was crumbling. To sustain the war, Russia began involuntary reserve call-ups, quietly mobilizing men despite public promises. Fear spread that these home region deployments would end at the front. Meanwhile, Russia escalated hybrid warfare, drones over Belgian infrastructure, sowing fear and division in Europe. The state was stretched thin economic pain, covert mobilization, and psychological warfare. Russia remained dangerous, but deep cracks were showing. The cost of war was catching up with the Kremlin. As winter gripped Eastern Europe, the war entered a new, dangerous phase. Russia's attack on Kyiv's hospitals signaled its intent to break Ukraine's will by targeting civilians and infrastructure. Ukraine raced to secure gas supplies, bracing for Russia's energy war. But Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil changed the conflict's nature. Now, Moscow faced real economic pain for every attack. The war would be fought on many fronts: frozen trenches, skies over Russia, and the halls of Western power. Russia's goals remained unchanged: total subjugation of Ukraine. The struggle ahead would be long and bitter. Ukraine's resilience and innovation had shifted the stakes. The world saw a nation refusing to be broken, no matter the cost. The path to peace was distant, but Ukraine's fight for its future was unwavering.